Evidence that's important in a trucking case can disappear quickly.
You've been through enough. This is Now What? Your guide to recovering after life blindsides you. I'm Jordan Travis, a personal injury attorney here in Colorado. And together we'll cut through the confusion, expose the insurance games, and let you get the clarity you deserve.
Hello, welcome back to the Now What podcast. I'm Jordan Travis. I'm a partner here at Travis Legal Offices based out of Castle Rock, Colorado. Today, we are going to talk about trucking cases. Obviously, they're similar in some ways to car accident cases, but they also are completely different in a lot of ways. So I just wanted to talk generally about what a truck accident case looks like, why it's different, questions you may have about them, and essentially how our office handles trucking cases and how they should be handled compared to normal cases. So the first thing to understand in any truck accident case is just essentially the physics of it and what's involved. Trucks in general, in order to classify as a semi-truck, in the state of Colorado anyway, their regulations say anything over 26,000 pounds unloaded classifies as a semi-truck. So you see a lot of box trucks or vehicles that are specifically designed to stay underneath that regulation. We've had cases where actually one was 25,995 pounds, so 5 pounds under that limit on purpose, so they didn't have to comply with the standards and regulations of a 26,000 pound vehicle. But either way, 26,000 pounds or above is what legally is classified as a commercial motor vehicle within the state of Colorado for purposes of a semi-truck or trucking accident case. And that's an important number to remember because that is just the unloaded weight. When you add in a trailer or any sort of equipment, a tow, any differentiation among those, the loaded weight becomes quite significantly more than that, up to sometimes 80,000 plus pounds in total momentum going forward. And then you turn around and you compare that to a standard passenger vehicle, a small sedan or something along those lines. Usually those are 3 to 5,000 pounds. If you have a large SUV, maybe it's 8 or something like that. But either way, it's significantly less. And a lot of times it's magnitudes of 10 times to 25 times more weight on the semi-truck, than there would be in the vehicle that got hit. And that's an important factor to keep in mind because as everyone was taught in high school and even before that in elementary school, the weight of a vehicle or any object times its velocity determines how much force is involved. So when you have a 80,000 pound truck moving at a velocity of, let's say, 60 miles an hour, hit a car that only weighs 5,000 pounds, the forces involved are very asymmetrical. I can't even describe it how bad the weight ratio impacts the injuries and the severity and the damage involved. And I've heard this before, the weight from a human to a grizzly bear is a lot less than the difference between you and the ratio, you driving your car compared to a semi-truck. Like, just comparatively, it's multiple times bigger than that. So that also influences when we're talking about the physics involved, just from a standpoint of the semis in general. The weight of them influences the stopping distance. So, and it seems pretty obvious, but a heavy vehicle cannot stop as quickly as a lighter vehicle, even going the same speeds. And that influences a lot of how injuries happen, especially in rear end collisions or collisions where the truck has to try to avoid some object or maneuver around something. The lack of mobility and stopping distance can, in fact, by itself, just cause car accidents. And the truck driver should be trained and aware of those to mitigate the risk and the damage involved. There are other physics involved as well. Beyond just the forces involved that cause injuries, there are just the way things are shaped as well can influence the physics of the case and how injuries occur in people who are hit by semi trucks. For example, there's a thing called underwriting, which is essentially where a car, it is what it sounds like, a car goes underneath a semi or semi rides over the top of it. It can be from the trailer, it could be from the actual front of the semi, but basically the semi is higher than most standard sedans. And so its impact zone, where the front of the truck actually impacts the rear of the vehicle, may not match up with where the rear of the vehicle is designed to have it be hit. Another way of thinking about it is if a semi truck rear ends you, it might hit you in the trunk of the car instead of in the bumper. And the bumper is designed to absorb some of that shock. And those differences, the shock absorption, the forces involved, the speeds, the shearing forces, which is again where it's another physics issue, but it's basically the how the forces impact the body in different ways and different motions and all that type of thing. It impacts quite significantly the injuries involved. Shearing motions in general, and there's biomechanical studies out there that we've seen and I've reviewed for our cases, those quite significantly cause, very commonly anyways, spinal injuries of various types, whether it's disc or actual spinal cord injuries, vertebrae, you name it. Shearing injuries are a significant risk factor for any case, but especially when the shear forces involved are quite significant. So anyway, that's from a mechanical side of things, why trucking accidents in general cause more injuries than you would see otherwise. A lot of fatalities often happen in trucking accidents for the same reasons. And even if it's not a fatality, just being rear-ended or sideswiped or head-on, whatever happens with a truck, the forces involved are just so much higher than any other car involved that the injuries tend to also be a lot higher. It's just the human body and cars in general aren't designed to take that amount of force, no matter how much we try to protect against that. So there are a couple different ways that most commonly the truck accidents in general occur. One of the ways that you'll see a lot of times is a rear end collision because of the stopping distance. Sometimes weather plays a factor in that. So if a stopping distance of a truck, it's influenced by a lot of different factors. It can be influenced by if it's loaded or unloaded, when the last time the brakes were inspected or maintained, the tires on the truck. It can be influenced by the weather and the road conditions. Is it dry? Is it wet, just like rain? Or is it snowy and icy? Those are all different factors. The grade of the road, which is the steepness of the road. Is it uphill, downhill? All of those things influence how trucks crash from any case's perspective, but particularly in rear end collisions when a truck slams into the back of our client. Those are significant factors. We've also dealt with cases and also have heard of cases too where, in just like any other type of case, distracted driving is a significant issue. And I'll get into the regulations of drivers in a little bit, but truck accidents do occur because of the drivers, despite all the regulations involved and best efforts of everyone to moderate and mitigate the damages from trucking cases. Again, the damages are just so high from these that the law and trucking companies and drivers themselves, everyone tries to take as many precautions as we can to try to avoid these type of collisions, but they still always happen. I mean, as long as humans are involved, there will be accidents involved. The next type of truck accident you hear about or see quite commonly is a rollover. So rollovers obviously happen. It could be that the truck tips over. It could be that the trailer tips over due to wind or any number of issues. The truck could tip over due to a too sharp of a turn or again, a rollover is what it sounds like, but the truck itself can roll over, and then the car it hits could also roll over. When you have that amount of force, if that amount of force is involved, if you are T-boned or hit on a perpendicular angle from a truck, the forces involved may end up causing your car to actually, either lift and come into the air and roll, or just skid across the ground and then catch and roll. It could push a car down a ditch. I've seen cases and dealt with cases like that where a truck accident happens and someone's pushed down a ditch, which causes the car to roll. There are, again, a lot of different ways that rollovers can happen in trucking accident cases. But the significant factor in that is once you introduce a rollover, instead of just a collision, the rollover obviously puts a lot of different forces, not only upon the car being rolled over, but upon the bodies that are inside of it. So you're introduced, instead of just a rear end collision, you're introducing crushing mechanisms that can often crush people who are an occupant inside of the vehicle. You're introducing different motion side to side. There are a lot of different physics involved that can impact injuries in a rollover case. And again, those happen even at low speeds if the stability of the truck isn't right, or it hits at a certain angle. There's rollovers all the time. You see them, whether it's on the news or they just happen and it doesn't make it to the news. Trucks do roll over and cause rollovers. There are also scenarios, and I know Colorado in particular, just right down the road from our office, was dealing with this fairly recently. It's not one of our cases, but I do know that it happened where a tire blew out on a truck, and that caused obviously the truck to skid and cause a whole bunch of debris on the road, other drivers to have issues. But I mean, tires on these trucks, if they're not properly inspected and maintained by the trucking carrier or the driver and everything else, especially because trucking tires themselves are quite expensive. That is a reality, that tires are expensive, but they're only designed to be used a certain number of mileage based upon the tread involved and certain, obviously, pressures and heats and all sorts of different things, different temperatures, different weather conditions. Each tire obviously is manufactured for a different reason. But when you start getting into trucking companies that may cut corners, like doing retreading of tires or having improper tires for the wrong season, leaving summer tires on in the winter, those type of things can either cause blowouts in some cases or cause other secondary issues that basically result in a collision of some kind. So that's something to keep in mind too. It's not just the truck itself that could and the weight involved that could cause an accident. It's the tires that are a significant factor. The last thing, and we've already mentioned this, is the friction that's involved depending on the weather conditions of the road. So if it's dry versus wet versus snowy, that impacts how the tires are working. It impacts how the brakes are working. It impacts how the weight is distributed, and whether the weight is, especially in windy days, whether the weight is being blown around and those type of things. So then you start. That's not even talking about the visibility issues with certain weather conditions. So all of these things are factors that cause trucks to crash. And then we get into the regulations. So again, as I was saying earlier, because the truck accidents are so bad and so many people either are critically injured, maimed or otherwise, or even just injured or even killed in a truck case, there are a lot of regulations that apply to trucking carriers, trucking drivers, trucking companies, motor carriers, maintenance providers, shippers and loaders. There's a lot of different people that can be involved in this, but there are regulations that apply to this. They're called the Federal Motor Carrier Safety Regulations, FMCSR, Federal Motor Carrier Safety Regulations, and they're set by what is the FMCSA, which is the Federal Motor Carrier Safety Administration. So the administration creates these regulations for federal motor carriers and the safety thereof. Those regulations are quite extensive. They include hours of service requirements, so how long the truck can be moving at any one time in a row, how many hours. It includes how many hours a truck driver or the truck can be on duty, how long breaks need to be, how many hours a truck driver should work per week, how high or how long the driver can be awake for. So regardless of on duty window, they can't be awake for a certain number of hours. It's usually 18, or it is 18 hours that they have to be. That's the maximum wake window. So even if you woke up and you weren't driving, you can only be awake for 18 hours. You have to rest after that. Those are the type of regulations that apply specifically to a truck driver themselves. There are also other regulations that apply to the truck itself. But the point is, as it relates to the driver, we want to avoid any driver-related issues, just generally as a society, because the damages are so severe. So a fatigued driver, in a lot of cases, is functionally equivalent, if you tested them on any sort of test, it's functionally equivalent to a drunk driver or impaired driver. So that's why those regulations are in place. Anyone behind the wheel of a truck going, whether it's 26,000 pounds or up to 80,000 pounds or even more, we can't have people who are impaired legally or otherwise due to sleep behind the wheel of those cars. They don't pay attention enough, and they don't care enough respect for what is going on in their surroundings and the people and the damage that they can cause to the people around them. So in order to comply with those regulations, there are regulations put on not only the truck driver themselves, but then on the truck, there's technology to monitor certain things. Sometimes they're called electronic data recorders. There's dash cameras. There's engine records and mileage. There's all of this stuff is tracked automatically, but it's only retained for a certain amount of time. So, and that I'll move on to that in a little bit about the evidence that's necessary in a truck case. But there are regulations that apply to, okay, we know the driver is required to do certain things. The truck is also required to have certain mileage conditions, hours of service, on time or usage time. And instead of just trusting the driver to report those, the trucks have electronic data recorders that capture a lot of that information for anyone who wants to see them. And it gets reported either to the Federal Motor Carrier Safety Administration. It can be reviewed by Colorado State Patrol officers. It can be reviewed by experts or our office if we had access to the vehicle. But that's an important way to regulate the truck. The truck also has regulations on visibility. So if it has to have certain stickers on it, it has to be maintained and have maintenance records. It has to be inspected a certain amount of times before it's driven, and then also get inspected at certain mileages to make sure that the truck itself is operating properly. And then the last category that is regulated under the Federal Motor Carrier Safety Administration and regulations is regulations that apply to people that own or operate the truck. So different than the truck drivers, it sometimes can be the same, but usually it's different. And different than the truck itself, there are rules that are in place to prevent the actual owners of the trucks or the companies or loaders and also driver, different people, but generally as a category, the owners from doing certain actions that are risky to the rest of the population. So, for example, the easiest one I can think of, because it comes directly from one of our cases, is that there are regulations in place that prevent a trucking company from hiring a driver who's unqualified, who doesn't have a commercial motor vehicle license to operate a commercial motor vehicle. So they have a trucking company is supposed to do drug testing, it's supposed to do background search, it's supposed to do a driving history check. There are processes in place and are clearly defined within the regulations that specify who and what processes a trucking company itself can undertake before it even puts a driver on the road. And in our case specifically that comes to mind, the driver who was thrown behind the wheel of this semi truck, he didn't even have a license at all. It had been revoked numerous times, just his personal license, let alone never even had a commercial motor vehicle license. And the trucking company didn't do enough investigation and put him behind the wheel. And of course, he wasn't paying attention. He was actually on his cell phone, I believe, or GPS is what he called it. But either way, he was distracted driving because he didn't know to take proper care and wasn't instructed on it. It shouldn't have been behind the wheel in general. He rear-ended our client, who was just stopped at a red light. Our client was sitting there, and this guy hit him at 50 miles an hour while driving a truck. Those are serious issues that if the trucking company had done the proper investigation into their driver, the truck, and who was behind the wheel at certain times and follow those regulations, that collision could have been avoided. So those are why those regulations are in place. There are regulations for, like I said, there's the owner of the truck, which is often called the motor carrier. There's the freight broker, so who loads the truck, making sure that that's loaded properly. You can't put too much weight on it. You have to distribute it certain ways. There are regulations on the maintenance provider, the manufacturer. Again, there's a whole subset of people that are involved in a trucking case, and identifying which one is at fault for the collision, or probably anyway, in most collisions, there's probably multiple layers that failed and multiple people at fault or entities at fault. That is where you would need an attorney to help untangle what we think of as the web of liability. Who's at fault in a trucking case is often a network of multiple failures along the way, and untangling who is it, what are their insurance limits, how are they at fault, what information can we discover from them that proves they're at fault. That's where an attorney frankly should get involved in a case, and is necessary, because oftentimes without doing the proper investigation, and it's quite extensive, but proper investigation, you may not know that someone else is actually the cause of the collision. That may not even be the driver themselves. It could have been the maintenance provider who failed to inspect the brakes properly, or who knows, whatever else. But an attorney should get involved in any trucking case to investigate liability for you and untangle who's at fault. There is also, anytime a trucking collision happens, the Federal Motor Carrier Safety Administration is supposed to get a report from the trucking company that says, hey, we were involved in an accident. Here's what happened. Get a copy of the police report if it's available. But basically, the carrier itself is supposed to disclose to the safety administration what happened, when, where, and why. And depending on all those circumstances, the administration himself, separate from the injured party, the actual federal government, can institute fines and penalties, revoke the license of the business to even operate these trucks. A number of penalties and fines and enforcement actions can be taken against a trucking company by the government for the failure to comply with these federal motor carrier safety regulations. And as an attorney involved, it's my job in any case to verify the history of any truck that hit our client. I need to go back through and find out, did this trucking company have multiple instances of this same issue in the past that just now caused an accident? So, in that other case, have they hired other people who are unqualified, and those people were only caught speeding or something along those lines instead of actually causing a collision? Well, then they're on notice, the trucking company, that they're not following the regulations. They knew they're not following the regulation. They continued to do so in the first couple times and may have gotten away with it with only a speeding ticket or something. But the next time it did injure our client and cause a severe collision. So that documentation of a trucking company's history and pattern of violations or negligence issues is important in any case. A couple other things I just like to touch on trucking cases. The minimum insurance limits in Colorado for any vehicle that's over 26,000 pounds is $750,000 for a general freight. If it contains any hazardous materials like, hazmats, explosives, oil, those type of things, it's $5 million minimum, which sounds like a lot, but in trucking cases can go by very quickly, especially if multiple people are involved, multiple injured parties. You start getting into the severity of the injuries again. That money can go very quickly, but it is multiple times more than what obviously a standard car accident insurance carrier has to offer and carry. And many trucking companies carry policies well above that minimum of 750,000 because they have these trucks that are worth several $100,000. They have assets. I mean, it's their business. And so they carry insurance policies, sometimes 10 million plus, just to protect themselves in case one of their truck drivers injures someone or they injure someone somehow by their negligence. The second to last thing I'll talk about right now is the evidence that's important in a trucking case and how it can disappear quickly. So I mentioned earlier the electronic recorder, which carries out electronic data recorder, sometimes called a black box, that records how fast the truck was going, where the brakes were applied, all sorts of other information about the truck, service dates, all that type of thing. Those are only kept for a certain period of time. You can ask for it to be preserved, pending a lawsuit or any sort of serious issue, but you have to ask for it. If you don't, it could be destroyed or overwritten automatically. And if that happens, you're out of luck as far as the evidence that you can obtain. Same thing goes with dash camera footage. If the vehicle gets repaired or scrapped, the truck itself gets repaired or scrapped. So if you want to take photos of it, if you don't send out a preservation letter and ask to specifically see the repairs and take photos before it happens, you're out of luck. That's why it's very important in any trucking case to get an attorney involved almost right away, because spoliation letters that request all that information be preserved and put the trucking carrier on notice, the sooner they're sent out, the better. And that's no matter what. If I could send them out in an hour after an accident happens, I would. The reason being is that evidence can and will go missing if you don't ask it to be preserved. But if you ask it to be preserved and it goes missing, then it's a spoliation of evidence issue, which can lead to all sorts of other legal consequences down the road for the trucking company itself or the driver. For example, if there's a dash camera footage that shows they're at fault for the collision, you ask for it to be preserved, and then after they receive your letter for preservation, they destroy the evidence and it's no longer ever available. You can get an instruction from the judge on your case to basically deem them legally at fault for the collision because they destroyed evidence, and it's called an adverse inference. But there's some other issues involved. The point is that evidence disappears. There's a lot of stuff that isn't reported properly. There's deadlines for this stuff. There's automatic overwrites of certain information. And if you don't ask it to be preserved for your case or your attorney doesn't, it will not be done. There are certain parts of Colorado that are known for having really bad trucking accidents. And that's kind of where I'll wrap up, is if you're driving on I-70 going either up or down from the mountains, obviously there's a lot of altitude changes from Denver to, let's say, Breckenridge or Aspen or Vail, wherever you're going in the mountains. I-70 is the most common route to take. It goes east to west from Denver all the way up. And if you're going up, obviously there's elevation changes, but on the reverse side, you still have even declines, even when you're climbing overall to the mountains, just based upon how the road is. And again, when you're getting into the physics involved, the trucking speeds, forces, stopping distance, all those things change based upon the terrain. So you do see a lot of trucking accidents happen on I-70 going up to the mountains. And in fact, that's why they have those runaway truck ramps. If you're driving up there, anyone who lives in Colorado and drives up there, you'll see it every now and then on the side of the road. It's called a runaway truck ramp for a reason. It's basically when a truck their brakes fail because their load is too heavy or their speed is too high, and essentially they heat up too much and the brakes can't stop the vehicle anymore. Instead of having that truck driver continue on and pick up speed and momentum and not be able to slow it down, there's a ramp that's specifically designated at certain locations along the way. that the driver can roll up on, and it'll catch the tires and slow the vehicle down. Anyway, that's one of the common hotspots or issues in Colorado is I-70. Another one is I-25, which runs north to south. So it runs the opposite direction. And that can run all the way from Pueblo and Colorado Springs, which is southern Colorado, all the way north to like Fort Collins. And I mean, it runs all the way through into Wyoming. So north to south, I-25 has a lot of car accidents, mainly and truck accidents. Not only do the location changes and weather changes that occur all over the Front Range and grade and steepness and that type of thing, but a lot of those accidents tend to happen on I-25 due to the volume of traffic. There's many commuters that either go from Denver to Colorado Springs or travel all around, and I-25 is one of the biggest roads to do so in Colorado. And if you have a truck on it, obviously there's a lot more cars involved. It's just the risk is a lot higher. So if you're involved in a trucking collision in Colorado on I-70, I-25, anywhere else, you got hit by a truck, you probably, frankly, given the complexities of trucking cases, need an attorney involved on your case right away to protect spoliation of evidence, uncover who's at fault, why. Was the truck maintained properly? Was the driver properly employed, following the regulations and the safety administration's standards? All those type of things can influence a trucking case. So they get very complicated very quickly. And you need an attorney if you're hurt or hit by a truck. That's just the bottom line. I would recommend that for anyone in the state of Colorado or otherwise. Trucking regulations are very extensive, and unless you're specialized in this area of law, it can be quite overburdensome. And if you don't know what you're doing, you might miss something that is very important to a case. So that is this episode of the Now What podcast, covering trucking accidents and trucking cases.
If you're in Colorado and dealing with an accident or injury, reach out to us at Travis Legal Offices for your free consultation. You don't have to face this alone. Until next time, stay safe, stay strong, and remember, when life hits hard, you hit back.